Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We hope you're all staying safe and well. We're excited to have you with us as Sean Belling shows you how to create rapid value for your organization using Agile methodologies. So today's webinar is brought to you by the Wisconsin School of Business Center for Professional and Executive Development, which partners with individuals and organizations to enhance performance and productivity through professional development programs, certificates, coaching, consulting, and assessments. Professional development programs are delivered on-site at the Fluno Center in beautiful downtown Madison, and we now offer online programs facilitated by instructors with practical, real-world experience. The Center for Professional and Executive Development also partners with organizations throughout the country to provide customized on-site and online professional development programs, coaching, and consulting. For more information on the Center for Professional and Executive Development, please visit our website at uwcped.org. And now I'd like to introduce the facilitator of today's webinar, Sean Belling. Sean is an instructor and subject matter expert here at CPED and also serves as the Chief Information Officer at Madison College. Additionally, Sean is an adjunct faculty member at both UW-Madison and UW-Platteville. And with that, Sean, I'd like to say welcome and tell you how excited we are to have you here today.
Well, thank you, John, and it's great to be here this afternoon, and thanks to everybody for joining and spending some time with us to talk about value realization using Agile project delivery methods. By way of getting us started, I'd like to get a sense of the participants' experience levels and their orientation to projects generally, and specifically Agile projects, if indeed they have that experience. And John, perhaps as we talk through this and move on to the next slide, people would respond, and then we can pause for a moment and get a sense of what our audience, how our audience has responded.
Absolutely. So again, if I could ask anyone to put the responses in that questions box, and I will read those out loud for everybody then.
Excellent. Thanks, John. So while everyone does that, let's talk a little bit about the state of Agile. And this comes from an annual survey that is done by an entity called CollabNet in version 1. Version 1 is happens to be one of many software tools that help with Agile project management. They've been doing this survey now for a number of years, and they take a look at a few factors. What's interesting, particularly, is the second bullet under measuring success, and that is 42% of the respondents cite that they are experiencing delivered business value, which is one of the core topics of our discussion here this afternoon. It's also widely reported that organizations using Agile practices are experiencing success and experiencing pretty high rates of project success. We see that Scrum is the dominant flavor or variant of Agile. And we also see that a number of entities are using scaled Agile framework of the various ways to scale Agile. For example, large scale Scrum and Scrum at scale. Scaled Agile framework seems to be dominant. Just by way of setting the stage, thought we'd share some of that information. And now might be a great time to get some feedback, John, on some of the responses to the questions we posed a moment ago.
Yeah, thank you everybody for responding. So looks like we have a broad swath and a broad range of experience. We have several folks on the line with no experience in this area, and then ranging up to some folks who are senior project managers and Lean Six Sigma black belts with 20+ years of experience as well. So all over the board, which is great to see so much diversity in the crowd here today.
Absolutely. And it's that diversity that has prompted me in the past to make sure that I include a few minutes on the basics of Agile for members of our audience who are relatively new. So we'll spend a little bit of time on this without going off into an entire instructional component on it. When we look at Agile as an approach to project management, one of the critical things that we want to keep in mind is that Agile assumes and embraces change. And it is based on an approach that, especially those who come from a quality background, I heard that mentioned, overall, we're looking at a plan, do, check, and act cycle. And so it's very iterative, it's flexible. And one of the most critical elements of Agile is embracing rapid and consistent value delivery. So you see that under common Agile characteristics, that emphasis on delivering working product value realization. There's a great emphasis on constant teamwork and collaboration both with the delivery team and also with customers. We embrace adaptability. We typically are using very short iterations, often called sprints. There's a great focus on self-organizing, self-managed teams. And again, iterative planning. We're constantly learning as we go through the Agile life cycle, and we're bringing that back into the work that we do to progressively get better as a team and also to learn more about the work that we're doing. There are a number of ways to describe Agile, but at its most basic form, we take a look at 3 core roles: the team itself, some kind of a servant leader. It could be a project manager, or if you are indeed using Scrum, you'll have the Scrum Master, a critical role known as the product owner. Again, depending on how you are implementing Agile, this role may take on some different names. That role is the role that is really focused on making sure that the team is delivering value by making sure the team is working on the right things. We have a few core ceremonies or practices: planning a sprint. Every day the team gets together to talk about what they've worked on, what they plan to work on, and most critically talk about any impediments that they might need to address in order to meet their commitments. And then at the end of each planned increment of work, there's a review of that increment of work. They demonstrate their completed work to customers and stakeholders. They gain feedback on that work, and then as a team, they talk about how they work together to see if there are 1 or 2 critical things that they could do right away that might improve their performance, and if there are any practices that they feel they should stop doing. When we look at Agile practices, there are a few critical artifacts. We start every project by creating an initial product backlog, that list of all of the things that the product owner, customers, the team itself all deem necessary to deliver the project or product in question. We have then, for each increment of work, we prepare a backlog specific to that sprint or that increment. Those prioritized items that the team is going to work on right away because they are deemed as of highest business value, or they may be things that from a project planning perspective may be necessary to satisfy dependencies that are going to become critical down the road. We often look at how an Agile project is progressing by using something called the burn down chart, just one of many artifacts that can be used to visualize the amount of remaining work. When we look at metrics to determine how things are going and how a team is performing, we have a metric called velocity. It's a way of measuring how much work a team is capable of producing within that defined time frame. And it's super valuable because it helps us have empirical data that we can then base our future planning. We can determine how much work the team could be expected to accomplish in a defined time frame, or how much time it will take to complete a projected amount of work. Agile relies on the backlog that consists of user stories or features. And so one of our metrics is how many of these have we completed off of the backlog, and we can take a look at that from a percentage of user stories or features delivered. And then the ultimate metric in Agile is delivered value. Have we delivered working product to our customers or organization that has indeed delivered value and justified the time and energy that we've spent on that part of the project? When we think about Agile and we begin to focus on some of the reasons why we're all here this afternoon, one of the great things about Agile as an approach to projects and product development is that it has that focus on business value. With the iterative approach and the emphasis on delivering something that is working, something tangible, our customers and our organizations can derive that business value, and we go into this approach and we go into projects with an interest in delivering this as quickly as possible so that we can get that feedback and move rapidly from delivery to delivery to continue that cadence of value realization. When we look at Agile as a way of delivering projects, there are a few other things to keep in mind, and that's that organizations who can do this successfully, they can leverage the methodology and keep their eye on that value realization perspective not only deliver value quickly, but they earn credibility within their organization. And the people who are sponsoring the project and the teams themselves gain credibility and may earn the opportunity to not only continue the iterative delivery of the project they're working on now, but also to potentially launch additional projects using this approach and to work through additional business value realization. So by way of setting things up, let's talk a little bit about the objectives of the session. We're going to talk a bit about how Agile actually enables rapid value realization. We'll talk about some key steps to successfully leverage Agile so that your organization can indeed experience value realization. And we'll do all this by using a few examples from some case studies. They happen to be case studies that I was very familiar with a few years back when I was leading delivery for a software company. And we'll talk a little bit about how Agile worked very well to maximize and ensure rapid value realization. As John noted, if at any point you have questions, please feel free to post them. There'll be some questions that I will reach out to all of you to get you engaged and see how you're feeling and thinking about some of these topics. And we'll also work to reserve some time at the end to just have a general Q&A session. One of the examples that I want to talk a little bit about was an e-commerce software implementation for a fairly well-known organization based in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And one of the things that was really exciting about this particular project was the opportunity to see how quickly an Agile project team could indeed deliver value. This particular project was set up using 2-week sprints, and it was a combination team made up of people from both the customer and the implementation consultant. The most amazing thing about this particular project was how the business stakeholders got to see value within the first 2 weeks of the sprint. The project itself was kicked off to implement this e-commerce system. It was a very aggressive project. It was only 8 weeks of work. That was 4 2-week sprints. So after that first sprint, the project team worked to refine the branding, make sure that all the product and customer data was loaded, set up certain basic integrations, and then had one final sprint that was dedicated to go live and support. The really interesting part of this, and I've been telling this story now for, gosh, nearly 6-7 years, was during that first demo. Keep in mind, this is after the first 2-week sprint, had the product set up in a basic way with some branding, some sample products loaded. We had the buy flow set up, and we were doing this demonstration. And I had been warned or tipped off that there was a fairly influential person on the phone named Sam, and that his approval and feedback would be very important. So we went through the demonstration, and Sam, after seeing this, said, "Hey, this is great. Could I have the slides?" The entire room was quiet. Sam was on a conference webinar, much like we are, and people weren't clear on his question. And suddenly it dawned on me, he thought he was looking at slideware. And I said, "Sam, this is live working software after 2 weeks." There was a pause, and then Sam said, "Can we go live Monday?" Laughter in the room, good feelings all around. It was a big win for the team, and it just demonstrated how rapid value realization helped gain credibility for the team after only 2 weeks, provided motivation for the team, and set the stage for that team to then move very quickly through the rest of the project. So when we look at value realization and we look at Agile, and assuming that we're using what has become a fairly standard practice of 2-week sprints, the fact that a team is working and delivering value every 2 weeks means that the organization is going to see value, they're going to see progress, the team is going to remain motivated because they see the fruits of their labor on a regular basis. And this discipline of doing demonstrations and sprint reviews at the end of every sprint means that the accountability that comes with that increases the likelihood of on-time delivery. The other thing that Agile does is it enables very nimble project governance. Many organizations have some type of project governance structure. And if you're thinking about other approaches to project management, Sometimes that governance can be brought to bear on a monthly basis, maybe quarterly, and it's heavily influenced by project milestones that are established in a traditional phase-based project management approach. When you're using Agile, and again, assuming a relatively rapid cadence of 2-week sprints, the organization has the opportunity to govern and steer the project every 2 weeks. I experienced this in a product development organization where every 2 weeks, a group of top executives, the C-level team, combined with members of product management and other key areas of the organization, would meet to review the progress and the status of the current release, and also have an opportunity to provide additional governance and input onto where we should be steering some of the short-term sprints, but also thinking in terms of long-term roadmap development. So the fact that every 2 weeks there was an opportunity to put their finger on the pulse of the current in-flight release, it gave the governing team a bit more confidence and a way of regularly steering the direction of that particular product. One of the practitioners whose work I particularly admire is an Agile coach named Lyssa Adkins. And in the slide deck here in the presentation, you can see an address for a YouTube clip. When I'm teaching Agile project management, Scrum Master courses, and similar, I often use this particular video clip. Lyssa compares the approach to project management and delivery of waterfall and Agile as eating a wedding cake. And in the waterfall example, Lyssa describes eating the wedding cake one layer at a time and not really getting to done and experiencing all the value until you've gone through every layer of the wedding cake. Conversely, Lyssa describes in this clip Agile as eating the wedding cake a slice at a time, a thin vertical slice. And after you have metaphorically consumed a few slices, you may have value at that point. You may be at a point you could stop the project because you feel like you've achieved the value necessary. If not, you can deliver a few more slices. I encourage you to watch this clip. It's very interesting. And one of the things that I really appreciated the first time I saw it, and one of the reasons I continue to use it, is Lyssa illustrates how in traditional project management, we plan the entire project all up front when we know the least about the project we will ever know. The last bullet on the slide refers to that. Steve McConnell, well known in software development project circles, talks about the cone of uncertainty. And at the start of a project, the cone is at its widest point because we don't know what we don't know. Why would we want to commit everything at that point? Using an Agile approach, we focus on value delivery and we deliver a few slices at a time. And if at any point we determine that we have delivered all the necessary value, we can stop the project and we can redeploy those assets, whether it's financial, whether it's the people resources, to some other effort, which means that we've delivered value quickly and we can move on to the next thing. And in competitive situations, this can really help you leapfrog competitors who are moving a bit more slowly. The neat thing about delivering certain types of projects through Agile and experiencing this rapid value realization means that the organization can experience return on their investment very quickly. For example, this e-commerce project, as soon as the first 8 weeks were completed and they moved into the final sprint, which was all about go live and then the first phase of support, this organization was able to onboard customers. They had been socializing that this feature, this capability of business-to-business commerce was coming. And so customers signed up, registered, began placing orders immediately. And so this particular organization began realizing revenue right away and therefore began seeing a return on their investment. This not only generated revenue for the company itself, but seeing that immediate return gave them additional confidence as well as the financial capability to fund additional phases. Well, it's all been good news so far, but it's really critical to keep in mind that these benefits don't just happen. There are some misconceptions when it comes to Agile as a project management methodology. There are sometimes assumptions that Agile requires less planning, that Agile is a little bit of a looser way of working, and those are not true. Agile, when used appropriately, requires rigor and discipline. Organizations that hope that they can magically reap the benefits of Agile without making the kind of investments in training and socializing the approach throughout the organization are going to be disappointed. It's really important that we take a look at a few things that are going to help us be successful if we are interested in seeing Agile be successful throughout our organizations. What we look to do is build a strong foundation through a common basis in training, making sure that we evangelize Agile throughout the organization, make sure that we line up executive support, and then make sure that we practice Agile as a project management methodology with rigor and discipline. So we're going to spend a few minutes now talking about each of these in a little bit more detail. The first foundation for success is to establish this common basis in training. I've worked in organizations, and maybe many of you have too, where people come to the table, they come into an Agile setting or an Agile project team with some formal training, no formal training. Perhaps they've read a few books on Agile, but they don't have a common basis in training. And so what we run into are scenarios where people want to apply their own experience or their own belief in how things should be done. And instead of having synergy and getting the benefits from Agile, you end up with friction and lost opportunity. So one of the things that an organization seeking to experience rapid value realization using Agile should do is invest in a common basis of training. Identify a single common source for training and get the appropriate funds and investment of time to send people to this training. What you'll do is, as you move more and more people through this common training source, you'll establish that common understanding of how Agile works, common nomenclature, and you'll set a foundation where people can work together and move between teams, all knowing that they share that language, they share that experience, they share that common basis in training. The next key foundation for success and rapid value realization using Agile is evangelism. What you need are respected people within the organization who are willing to speak out, who are willing to talk about their past successful experience using Agile, and to hopefully reduce the fear and uncertainty and doubt that you sometimes experience when an organization begins to do some kind of a change, in this case, potentially a change of project process to using more Agile methods. This evangelism can help to build a base of support and get people thinking favorably, potentially reduce the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that might be associated with the change. And again, build a basis of support so that as Agile is adopted and used for more projects, more people are potentially willing to embrace and accept it and dive in for using it as an approach to deliver projects. This brings us to our first question. Looking to ask the participants for their feedback. Within your organization, who are the best evangelists?
So again, go ahead and put those responses in the question box. We'll give you a few moments to do that, and I will read some of those for the group.
Yeah.
Okay, we're starting to get some responses come in. So department managers and directors have been identified a few times. Anybody who's a respected resource within the organization, early adopters, particularly leaders. The CEO serves as another C-suite leaders serve as great evangelists. SMEs, again, trusted leaders, others that are respected within the organization, and the people responsible for the bottom line.
Yeah, those are all great examples, great responses, and absolutely spot on. People who have that respect, people who have experienced success and can, speak of it and have the credibility that goes, whether it's positional credibility, whether it's experiential credibility. Those examples are all perfect in terms of, who make the best evangelists within an organization. Somebody had mentioned the CEO, and that's a really good segue into the next slide here. This is not unique to adoption of Agile as a project management methodology. This is true of any kind of organizational change. It is absolutely critical to have executive support. One of the stories I like to share, it involves a company local to Madison that, oh goodness, probably about 10 years ago or so, had decided to embark on a major change of their enterprise resource planning system. They had a system that was about 20 years old, and the board of directors had been really encouraging the CEO to approve a project to replace it and go to a more modern ERP system. And as the project finally gained some momentum, and we talked about carrying forward, the board of directors and other key people sat down with the CEO and made it clear that absolutely, at the start of the project, unwavering and visible CEO support was going to be very, very critical. Even more importantly, 12 months down the road, when everybody was maybe a little sick of the project and some of the initial momentum had perhaps died off, unwavering and visible CEO support would be even more important. So again, that's an example that applies to implementation of a large enterprise resource planning project, but it's the same when we're thinking of any type of organizational change. Having that executive support at the start and throughout the entire life cycle of a change is absolutely critical. And if your organization is thinking about a move to Agile or adopting Agile as a methodology within its overall toolkit for project delivery, it's very important to line up executive support and make sure that from the top down, the interest, the visible support is going to be there throughout the entire time frame of this particular change and implementation. The fourth key that I want to spend some time on is the concept of rigor and discipline within the performance of Agile. There are a few really good examples of that. One of them is the definition of done. This is really important. When learning Agile, regardless of the method, the specific method, let's pick Scrum. One of the things that we talk about is the importance of defining the various backlog items. We may be using a form of a backlog item called the user story. And one of the most important things you can do is be sure that we have a very clear definition of what done looks like, and that we do not call that particular deliverable done until all of the conditions of done are satisfied. That's really important because when we're thinking in terms of value realization, there's this thing we call technical debt, that if you allow yourself to call an item done except for, you are accumulating small amounts of hidden technical debt every time you allow something to be called done except for and then move on to the next sprint. Now, the reason this is important is because when we get into the idea of rapid value realization, we rely on the concept of everything being done. And the reason this becomes critical is if we get to a point where a product owner or the sponsor, however that position manifests, if they're looking at the deliverables, and remember, we're going likely in 2-week sprints, so at the end of each sprint, we're demonstrating completed work. The product owner believes it to be complete, and we may get to a point where, let's say a project is planned for 8 sprints, and after 5, the product owner is very impressed with and very happy with what's been delivered and says, you know what, I'd like to ship this now. If you've been incurring hidden technical debt by allowing an undisciplined approach, the team is going to come back to the product owner and say, I'm sorry, we can't ship it right now because we have all these things that we have to finish before we can really call everything done. It could be documentation, it could be integration with some other component of a product or a system, whatever it is. It's very important that we don't allow that debt to accumulate, that when we say something is done, we are holding ourselves to a rigorous definition of done. Another question, John, is to survey the group to see who is familiar with this concept of technical debt. And for those who are, if they feel like people within their organization really understand it and buy into that necessity to see things get really done.
Great, we'll give everyone a moment to put their responses in. So some answers we're getting in here, again, kind of all across the board, some folks who aren't familiar with the concept at all, some that understand it and feel like they have a full understanding, and people who are just new to learning Agile, and folks who are indicating that their entire team has a very good understanding of this concept as well.
Thanks, John. Again, when we think of this concept, the idea of discipline with regard to calling something done only when it's really done, we connect that to the interest in rapid value realization, because for us to get value, it's got to be truly done. And for us to be able to say we've reached a point where we can ship a product and potentially ship it earlier than we originally anticipated, that rigor and discipline to being sure that things are done, there's nothing hidden left to do, very important to the core concept of rapid value realization. Another important concept with regard to rigor and discipline in the performance of Agile is something I've been calling ruthless prioritization for a long time. And when we say ruthless, we don't mean rude, cruel, unprofessional. We mean that we are making the tough decisions necessary so that we're not engaging in a common mistake that many organizations engage in, which is, yeah, we're gonna try to move all of these projects forward at the same time. Organizations that do that end up spreading their resources too thin, and instead of getting the value that they hope for, they end up delaying and deferring this value realization. Organizations that are highly functional and very focused on value realization are those that can prioritize ruthlessly. They can look at all the different things that they could spend their resources and time on, and they focus the attention on those things that are going to have the highest likelihood of rapid value creation, and they make the tough decision to defer these other projects. That can take different forms and shapes. In Agile, one of the things that we value is dedicated teams. And so rather than allow a team to be spread out and work on several projects simultaneously, by prioritizing one project and making that the sole focus of the team, we can ensure that it can move more quickly and begin to deliver that value sooner than later. When we look at the various things competing for a team's attention, it may be necessary to prioritize certain critical things and effectively tell the people who are interested in some of the less critical things that their interests are going to have to wait. And that's a tough thing to do. And that's where the ruthless part comes in, because human beings typically like to please and get approval from other human beings. And so the temptation there, especially for a leader, it's there to say, oh, sure, we'll find a way to do your thing and all these other things. That puts Agile teams in a position where they're set up for failure. They're set up where they're not going to be able to deliver value realization as quickly as if they could focus. Another question, kind of a set of questions for our participants, is to ask, first of all, do you feel like you work in an organization that can ruthlessly prioritize both at the project level and also at the feature or user story level? And then the second part is to get a sense of who the participants feel, whose job is it to provide prioritization?
Okay, Sean, we have some answers coming in. Some folks are saying that no, this isn't something that's supported by leadership. And then some of the individuals that are identified in organizations where it is supported and where it is taking place are identifying the product owner, leadership, the owner of the project. Although I will say, as more responses are coming in here, it does seem that the majority of the responses indicate that this is not supported and done regularly within their organizations.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. in the time that I've spent in the discipline of project management and in different verticals such as product development, information technology, the ability to prioritize is something that many organizations struggle with. And when we see this happen, again, it becomes a scenario where organizations end up trying to make forward progress on many, many projects, and they end up delaying value realization on all of those projects. When I think about project management as a discipline, and if I were to focus on one or two things that an organization should really focus on to improve, the ability to prioritize and make sure that the entire organization understands how that's done is one of the most important things, one of the most valuable areas of improvement that an organization can make. And especially when it comes to maximizing the value of using an approach to delivering projects like Agile. To take us back to the case study here for a few minutes, and you've gotten familiar with this already from some of the things I shared at the start of the webinar. So I'm going to add a little bit of dimension. One of the things I think that's important, so there's clarity on how this all worked. The organization had invested in training. The technology itself was a software as a service cloud platform. Those are a couple of things that, from a technical perspective, can really set a project up for success in terms of rapid value realization. The other thing that was really important was that this organization had completed a significant round of training. They had established that common basis in training, not just for the technical people in their organization, but they had also brought in many from the business side of the organization. So this understanding of Agile, this common basis in training, was shared throughout the entire company and was a significant pillar, significant foundational piece in setting this project up for success. When the team was formed, they were able to discuss their understanding of Agile as a way to move the project forward. So again, keep in mind, we had maybe 4 or 5 people from the delivery firm, and we had kind of a core group of 4 or 5 people from the customer firm. They got together to form a single team, establish some norms, establish routines, and began working in these 2-week sprints. As I noted earlier, they were able to get value realization within 2 months. The team launched this initial e-commerce website. From a sizing perspective, just to kind of give you an idea, more than 75,000 products from 400 different manufacturers. And this particular company shipped many orders daily to customers who needed equipment or repair components or supplies in order to keep restaurants and other businesses running. So this became a very, very important part of their overall ability to serve their customers. And again, because they were able to use Agile effectively for the reasons I mentioned a few moments ago, within 2 months from project launch, they were seeing return on their investment. The fact that they had this familiarity with Agile enabled their speed to value. It was a familiar practice for their business teams. It was something that was familiar to the organization, and certainly something familiar to the implementation team. And again, this was fairly unprecedented for an e-commerce system of this particular magnitude. What was really interesting is the success of this project put the sponsors in a position to ask for a follow-on project right away. So another question I'd come out to the participants with: how many of your organizations would be willing to launch another project on a brand new platform and using a fairly new project management methodology before the first project was even complete?
So some of the responses we're getting here, Sean, are not in a million years. Others are depending on the leader. And some folks are saying that their organization, they would.
Yeah.
And it looks like there's some instances of this happening in organizations right now.
Yeah. And again, expected. When we take a look at the spectrum of organizations, one of the things that we look at, and we talk about this in our Agile curriculum at CPED, is we talk about the continuum. We talk about organizations that have a high tolerance for risk. They have a high need for innovation, and are willing to do things like launch a second project before the first one's even complete. We also look at organizations at the other end of the spectrum that have a pretty low tolerance for risk and want to see things really proved out before they move ahead. And maybe one of the reasons that's the case is because their need for innovation isn't as high. Their need for stability outweighs that. So there are a number of factors that go into these kind of decisions. But one of the things that's certainly influential is the fact that in this case, this team, this organization using Agile as their approach succeeded with rapid value realization and were able to get that credibility that enabled them to get approval for the next project. A few highlights of this project. It was kind of neat in how this team rotated the role of presenter during the demo. So you didn't always have one person driving. In fact, in the very first demo, I had to do a part of the demo, which the night I arrived, I wasn't expecting. So I spent that night rehearsing in my hotel room, getting ready. They made sure that key business stakeholders were at every demo. They made sure that as we got the feedback from these business stakeholders, it was always included in the subsequent sprints. And they were totally transparent about their reporting. If there was a sprint where the team committed to 7 deliverables and they only completed 5, they talked about it and they explained why that was the case and what corrective actions they would take. To give you a visual, very high level of what this project looked like, you can see the kickoff, you can see the first 4 sprints where moved all the way through the project, and then the 5th sprint where they went into user acceptance testing and deployed it to production, and then a final sprint that was focused on rolling it out, getting customers on board, and then the initiation of the software warranty period. This was where, as this was progressing, the internal client project manager with that person's sponsor said, you know, we've got another business unit that would love to use this. Can we spin up that next project? And that happened to be their institutional and government sales unit. And they approved it, launched it, and moved right into the second project, which went live after only 4 sprints. So again, rapid approval, rapid value realization. That's 8 weeks this organization was able to launch. And the success of these first 2 kicked off yet a 3rd project. And then over time, this organization, they had planned this program as a 2 to 3 year program where once they had these initial storefronts set up, they would then go into continuous delivery mode where they could add features, they could add different ways to improve the customer experience, improve the efficiency of order processing, all using an ongoing cadence of 2-week sprints. To reinforce the message that we've focused on throughout the webinar so far, Agile project management as an approach to delivery can help to speed value realization. Using this approach can help the business focus on value delivery and do so rapidly and cost effectively. But there are some critical components necessary to make this happen. It's important that you have that common basis in training, that you have evangelists who are willing to speak favorably and get people converted and interested in trying this approach, and having unwavering executive support. And then once executing, following through with rigor, discipline, and an ongoing support for this approach. There's one more thing. When we think about implementing Agile, very often organizations will do so starting with their product development and product management organizations, or if it happens to be a technology-oriented department or organization, they may start in their IT department or in software development. And that's fine. However, to really see full value realization, companies and organizations should be thinking about optimizing the workflow from start to finish. So it's not just the front end of the process where we're conceiving of new products, developing that vision, and then moving through execution and delivery using Agile. We also want to bring Agile to our marketing processes, to manufacturing, procurement, and any other part of the value stream that has an influence on how rapidly we can bring value to the organization and to our customers. For those of you that have an interest and are familiar with how internal combustion engines work, it's kind of the same thing. Some people who like to make their cars more powerful will optimize the intake of air at the front of the engine, and that's great. But to really see the full effect, it's important to optimize the flow all the way through the engine system and through the exhaust by removing and opening up any constraints. So it's kind of the same thing with Agile as a delivery and project management methodology. So John, with that, we have some time available for questions, answers, feedback, discussion.
Great, thank you, Sean. So again, if there are questions you'd like to pose to Sean during this Q&A portion, please feel free to type those into the questions box. I'll give you a moment or two to do that, and then we will throw those out there for a response. All right, Sean, we have our first question coming in. So based on these comments that the whole organization can be optimized through Agile, does that mean that there's no room to use both Waterfall and Agile as PM methodologies in the same organization?
John, that's an excellent question. The short answer is that there is room for both. What's really important is for organizations to take a look at the types of projects that they deliver, and that they look at their needs for doing some types of projects using a waterfall or phase-based approach, and also look at projects that could benefit from an Agile approach. And to the extent that the organization can run some projects using that Agile approach, that's where the end-to-end optimization can really make those successful. But that doesn't rule out in any way using waterfall as an approach to project management, because it is a proven methodology, and it's highly appropriate for many, many types of projects.
Great, thank you. And Sean, are there any types of projects or examples of projects that Agile is not a good fit for in your experience? And can you speak to how Agile can be used in specifically in non-IT projects?
Absolutely. Let me answer the second part of that first. Agile and the different methodologies we know within the broad framework like Scrum, Kanban, and others, they actually have their roots going way back to manufacturing. Students of Agile, and actually students of quality, will recognize the roots in methods like the Toyota manufacturing system and the work of quality practitioners like Deming, who really gained a lot of exposure, especially in the post-World War II years, as their methods were embraced by Japan as they rebuilt their heavy industry and gained a reputation for quality. Then we see Agile really taking root in product development. So we see some of these Agile methods as ways to enhance the efficiency of manufacturing. We see Agile as a way to enhance the efficiency of product development. Marketing and publishing are areas where the repeatable nature of the types of projects that marketers and publishers have to do can sometimes lend themselves to Agile. You start to see, I worked in an environment where Agile was used for not necessarily drug discovery, but it was used for discovery of new pharmaceutical reagents and products. So there are a number of ways that that Agile can be applied. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question? Because I want to speak to that too.
Yeah, are there types of projects for which Agile is not an appropriate approach?
Sure, absolutely. When we think about projects that don't lend themselves to Agile, we tend to think about projects where, because of the size and scale and the long service life of the deliverable, we need so much upfront planning, and we need to get so many things locked in that we can bring the scale necessary to the project. Examples include things like building large structures, building power plants, bridges, and skyscrapers, building large vessels. I always joke in the Scrum Master and Agile project management class, I would not want to take a test dive in a nuclear submarine built using Agile. I don't want to go underwater in a minimum viable product. I want that project delivered using waterfall. So those are just a few examples.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question is, what's the best way to enforce or encourage ruthless prioritization? And this is coming from one of the attendees who has a lot of in-flight projects that they're working through right now at the same time.
Sure. I think one of the best ways to do it is to demonstrate the choke points, bottlenecks, and the delays in value realization that are occurring because the organization is trying to move all of its projects forward at once. I've spent time, consulting and working in organizations that have that issue, and I'll be candid, I still am working and gaining slowly that understanding with my own organization. There's this impression that, if we are able to tell all of our sponsors that we're moving forward with the 25 projects currently on our slate, that progress is seen as positive, but the slow pace, because of our resources being spread out so thinly, is actually delaying the implementation of any of them. And I like to use an analogy, and I'll do this as quickly as I can. It's easy if I can draw it, but I can't right now. But imagine you wake up one morning, you've got a 3-car garage, you've got a boat and 2 cars, and there are 5 massive boulders blocking the garage. Let's, for the sake of the discussion, to say that you have 4 members of your family who are able to help, and maybe a couple of willing neighbors, and you have to decide, we got to get these boulders out of the way. What would you do? Would you spread everybody out and try to push those boulders a little bit at a time with just the distributed force of the 6 or 7 people? You wouldn't do that. Instead, you'd prioritize. You'd say, well, we have this car, we absolutely have to get out of the garage because somebody needs to go to work or run an errand. Great, let's concentrate our energy on that boulder. Let's move it, let's get it done. Well, what's the next priority? It's summer in Wisconsin. Heck, we got to get at the boat. Let's move that boulder. So we concentrate our energy on that. And then lastly, we move the boulder in front of the car. Take that same approach with the projects in your organization and demonstrate to the leadership, here are the highest value projects in this company. If we can focus more energy on completing these projects, we will see value more quickly. But that means making the tough decision of taking resources off other projects, and rather than distributing them thinly, we focus their energy and power on 1 or 2 vital few projects, get them done, and then move on to the next vital few projects.
Great, thank you, Sean. And can you speak to a little bit to how Agile fits as a project management approach when you're dependent on outside sources or third parties for deliverables within a project?
Yeah, good question. The way that I've had some success dealing with that is to have the conversation with those external dependencies as early in the project lifecycle as possible. I'll give you an example. I was working with a team delivering an e-commerce system, and it was being delivered within the context of a large enterprise resource planning system. And the dependency on the external organization was to deliver a certain set and type of integrations. They were working on a waterfall schedule. We were working on an agile schedule. So what we did, as soon as this dependency became clear, was we met with the project management, and we met with the key technical resources, and we aligned our schedules, and we worked with them to prioritize the particular integrations that we would need, so that they would, in turn, prioritize those first in their delivery plan. After spending some time working with us, they actually they kind of took a different approach. As they saw how things were working with our agile plan, they actually retooled their plan to be a little bit more agile and less waterfall. But having that conversation early in the project lifecycle and making clear that those dependencies were important really helped.
Wonderful, thank you. Do we have time for 2 more questions, Sean?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, comes from a learner who is, or a participant who has long lead times, and they said that other teams outside of their Agile teams are considering Agile as a failure because they didn't see results quickly enough. How would you recommend proving out the value of Agile to outside teams without physical proof of completion of bits of projects?
That is a tough one. That's a really tough one. One of the things that I look at in a situation like that is to find examples of incremental value realization, incremental completion. And the other thing that might be important is to take a look. It's when we look at projects and we look at methodologies, it's very important to make sure we select the right approach. So it's possible that projects with these long lead times may not be a good fit for using Agile. But if indeed it seems like that's the best way to go, and there are other valuable outcomes that you're experiencing from using Agile on these projects, without knowing more about them off the top of my head, my recommendation would be to look for incremental value delivery that you can demonstrate is getting us closer and closer to the objective. I hope that makes sense.
All right, thank you, Sean. So I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. So there are some good questions coming in, but we have time for one more. So Sean, if we have somebody who's interested in taking the next steps into learning more about Agile and to really building up their skills in that area from kind of a blank slate, how would you recommend they get started?
Well, one of the best things that you can do is indeed to take a course in a particular Agile approach. My own experience, as I became more and more interested and had learned kind of on my own, that first step was for me to go to Scrum Master training. And clearly that is something that at CPED we have available. We have the upcoming certified Agile Scrum Master course and other supportive courses within the overall project management certificate program. But getting started by taking some sort of a formal organized class to introduce you to the methodology and get you familiar with it is a great way to get going.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sean. And I want to thank you again for your time today. A lot of great questions coming in. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but really appreciate everybody being engaged and asking those great questions to flesh out some of the topics that Sean covered today.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. And before you go, also wanted to share an exciting announcement from the Center for Professional and Executive Development. We have an expansion to our Master's Certificate in Project Management that is now being offered. It is covering both waterfall and Agile tracks. Each track of the Master's Certificate in Project Management is 6 programs that can be taken in any order that best meets your schedule and your professional development needs. After you complete the Agile track of the Master's Certificate in Project Management, you will also be a certified Agile project owner and a certified Agile Scrum Master. In addition, these programs can be taken individually to help you move more quickly with gaining your credentials in this area. For more information on these programs and the upcoming program sessions and schedule, please visit go.wisc.edu/cped-pmcert. So again, thank you everybody for attending the webinar today. We hope you're able to implement these techniques and concepts into your next project. Stay well, and we hope to see you on one of our upcoming webinars or in one of our upcoming programs. Have a wonderful afternoon.